Good morning, everyone. We'll begin with the reflections on universal well-being. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings release from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. So, good morning, everyone. Today, I wanted to speak about a topic that we've been discussing here in the residential retreat between Western and Asian culture. And this one's talking about conflict resolution. And I have a little bit of a summary talking about how do different cultures deal with conflict. And this article talks about cultures that are high context or low context. High context would often be, say, Chinese culture or Asian cultures, where you pay attention to the context of what's going on a lot. Whereas, say, low context cultures, for instance, America, you really focus on, the conflict at hand, what's going on. And this article, I think, had a little chart that I found very, very useful for looking at the differences cultures have in addressing conflict. So first, I wanted to go over some of the things it talks about that I thought was actually particularly interesting. So one area in the article talks about harmony. And it writes, harmony is one of the primordial values of Chinese culture. The Chinese consider harmony as the universal path which we all should pursue. Only when harmony is reached and prevails throughout heaven and earth can all things be nourished and everything flourish. The purpose of human communication, then, is to develop and keep a harmonious relationship in a continuously transforming process of mutual dependency among interactants. Here's a key line. It says, thus, harmony is the end rather than the means of human communication. To the Chinese, conflict is not treated as problems of communication, but rather as detractors from harmony. Human communication is not a process in which we strive to direct the interaction to our own favor. Instead, it is a process in which we try to adapt and relocate ourselves in the dynamic process of interdependence and cooperation. To sincerely display a wholehearted concern for the other is therefore a gateway to reach a harmonious relationship. As a result, aiming to establish a conflict-free interpersonal and social relationship is the ultimate goal for Chinese interactions. When we were here discussing this, one of the men shared something I thought was quite insightful. He said, when you're working with, say, a group of Westerners, say Americans, often there's a feeling that if one person kind of meets their potential to the fullest ability, then everyone's brought up. So the goal is to help everyone realize their full potential. He says, actually, he came from an Asian environment. He says, in Asia, we're quite different. The goal is to actually have harmony. So we oftentimes maybe sacrifice our own personal ambitions or aspirations for the good of the group, for group harmony. So I think this is actually quite interesting as a reflection that in Asian culture, perhaps, again, there's generalizations, not true in every case, but as a rule of thumb, in Asian culture, you could say communication is in service to harmony. Harmony is the goal. Whereas in Western culture, harmony is often instrumental. Harmony is only useful insofar as that it serves everyone's kind of aspirations and potential. Interesting. Right? And then, so if you think about that, and when it comes to different cultures then, what's the differences? How does it play out? So this article had a chart. One side it says high context cultures, the other side it says low context cultures. So it says, when do you enter a conflict? So in a high context culture, this happens when a cultural normative expectations are violated. Basically group norms. What the group community kind of holds as its basic rules of behavior and etiquette. So when somebody really doesn't follow along the rules, for when I was at the 16,000 Buddhas, and there's a kind of a cultural norm, maybe not so strong now, but especially when I started, everyone went to morning and evening ceremony. When you do not follow the norms of the community, then there's some conflict, there's some tension. For a low context culture, say American culture, when there's a conflict? When personal normative expectations are violated, or individual values. You act in a way that disrespects me, or disrespects my values. So we get into a conflict, right? My needs are not met. And then he says, on this article, it says attitude. So usually the way that conflicts are addressed in a high context culture is non-confrontational and indirect. You don't talk to the person directly about the conflict. You give maybe hints, kind of letting the person know just kind of gently, indirectly. So for instance, at CDTB, what I found was if somebody was not following the general guidelines, people would start to treat them a little bit differently and give them a maybe facial expression or treat them a little bit coldly. And for many times an American have no idea what's going on, right? But in Chinese culture, that's kind of like an indirect way of giving you a signal. Something you're doing is not quite right. It's not meeting the cultural norms of the whole group. For Westerner, oftentimes it's a direct confrontation. When you do this, you're making me feel this. And so I want you to do this. Or could you do this? Right? If it's a little bit more gentle. You kind of address what's going on directly. This is conflict management. It says high context cultures are very effective and intuitive, whereas low context cultures are factual and inductive. So what does this mean? Effective intuitive is oftentimes more, has to do with emotions and feelings and intuitions, So like when you're in the conversation, say, okay, so how is that person actually feeling? They're saying yes, but I can see from their expression, their body language, they mean a no, or they're feeling hurt, right? So how do I work with that? Whereas in a low context culture, it's oftentimes like a logical argument. You did this, I saw this, da 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 da. I make my case. This is communication style. It says oftentimes in high context culture, there's more silence, and the use of language is ambiguous. And oftentimes you avoid saying no directly in order to, you could say, avoid creating an unharmonious atmosphere. Right? If harmony is most important, then you don't want to be seen as in a conflict, which is then not harmonious. So you're just mostly trying to send silent signals or indirect signals to kind of nudge things back into maybe the way that is in the cultural values. Well, in a low context culture, it really values self-expression, verbal fluency, and eloquent speech. So can you make your point clearly, articulately, and with strength, right? With logic. And the goal is to persuade the other person to your point of view by directly expressing my point of view, right? Just a direct. And you see this also in just body language. In the West, oftentimes it's when you're in a conflict, you have direct eye contact. You look directly at the person, and you speak to them with strength and clarity, and the other person, you assume would do the same thing, and there's a way of showing your respect. I'm having a serious conversation with you. In Asia, I think that would be very uncomfortable. And most of the time, you don't look. Right? You say something, and you kind of don't want to have them lose face. So you kind of maybe just glance a little bit to see what they're feeling, but then you kind of keep your head down and try to be indirect. Then it says thinking process. So they say oftentimes in high context cultures, non-linear thinking patterns are the best way to construct the truth. Whereas in low context cultures, linear process of logic and rationality to discover an external objective truth. So in high context cultures, because it values the context, it realizes that many times what's going on is not just the person here, but actually a lot that's going on all around. So there's a kind of a sensitivity to the whole environment. While in an American culture, oftentimes it's very, okay, this person did this, then this happened, and this happened, so I need to address this cause, this root problem, which is this person's behavior or this person's attitude, and you go directly to that source. And so I won't go too much more, but just reflecting on those differences, you can see how interesting it is to try to live in an environment with different cultures. For those who come from a high context culture, or those who grow up in a low context culture, or the struggles that parents who maybe grew up in Asia have with children who are growing up in America. But I wanted to also bring it into the Dharma, because I think the Buddha is somebody who is very sensitive to human dynamics. And he set up the monastic Sangha, I think, skillfully. The Buddha truly valued harmony. And he says even the Sangha is a he zong, harmonious community. But the Buddha defined harmony actually not quite in the same way that Chinese culture defines harmony, which is, I think, oftentimes maybe at a superficial level. Sometimes in Chinese culture, it's just everyone getting along. No conflicts. The Buddha's definition of harmony is actually very existential cultivation. It says, can you be in the community and act in ways by body, speech, and mind with loving kindness? Can you live with shared values? Shared worldview? Can you share the material gains that you get? Things are held in community. And you can live by the same standard, same ethical code. They're called the 6 harmonies. And so this is what the Buddha emphasized. While at the same time, he also has ways to deal with conflict that's pretty direct. When somebody is really not upholding the standards of the community, the Buddha created mechanisms to help correct it. Oftentimes it's self-correction, but sometimes it requires somebody addressing it directly. And for the Buddha, this harmony on one end of the case, it is a goal, but actually it serves a deeper purpose, which is actually for everyone to realize their true potential, which is Buddhahood. But interesting enough, realizing Buddhahood supports the harmony of everybody. So within the Buddhist Sangha, I think these two are held in a very interesting balance and mutual support. Harmony supports our full potential, and our full potential supports this deeper place of harmony. So maybe I'll just say that much for this morning. But I think it's worth reflecting on, because right now we live in a society that's very global, with cultures coming together. And the East is becoming more Western, and the West is becoming more Eastern. And so maybe you can reflect on for yourself, how do you deal with conflict? And can we learn new ways so that we can truly be in harmony with each other? Okay, let's do 3 steps, 1 bow.